Timothy Morton is undoubtedly one of the most influential thinkers of today. Over the 2 decades, their style became easily recognizable as they seamlessly mix together philosophical reflections with pop culture references, personal testimonies, and an omnipresent sense of climate emergency. Their manifold interlocutors include Björk, Pharrell Williams, MC Hammer, or even Dante Alighieri. And today here at the Inspiration Forum, Timothy is going to address for the first time the audience in Czech Republic, thanks to collaboration between Ji.hlava, Documentary Film Festival, Faculty of Humanities at Charles University in Prague, and ArtMap. We are going to talk about hell. We are going to talk about Christianity and about climate crisis, which is a combination that actually makes increasingly more sense on a heating planet, since this planet, the Earth, begins to resemble, if not the hell itself, then at least purgatory for sure. Perhaps you remember a famous quote by Jean-Paul Sartre that hell is other people. Well, my sincere belief is that today we learn why Sartre was actually wrong, that it makes sense to relate to each other, to love each other, and to forgive. So just a brief note now about myself. My name is Lukáš Likavčan. I'm a philosopher focused on emerging technologies, ecology, and astronomy. And it is my great pleasure to moderate this event and to exchange a couple of ideas with Timothy. So now a bit of housekeeping before we welcome Timothy on the stage. Timothy will begin with presenting their short introductory talk, followed by a conversation between me and Timothy. And after that, we open the floor to your questions. And I'll make sure we can hear actually a lot of your questions, since I'm sure that many of you are familiar with Timothy's work and have plenty of curiosities, plenty of questions to ask. And since this event is done in collaboration with Charles University, here in Ji.hlava, we will say goodbye to Timothy at one point, which is going to happen roughly around 1720. And the event is going to continue for another 40 minutes in the Jan Sokol Auditorium in Prague. But wherever you are, do not worry, because this event is recorded, and you will be able to revisit the full version in the near future. So please now welcome Professor and Ritashi Guffey Chair in English at Rice University, Timothy Morton.
Hello, everybody. Hi. Oh, it's so lovely to see you. It's a great honor to be here. I'm very grateful to you for having me. Hello, Lukáš. Hello, Andre. Thank you, Iveta. Thank you, everybody, for hosting this. I've always enjoyed talking with my interlocutors in Czech Republic, and this is a very good opportunity for me to share some things with you. I'm very touched. So I'm actually wearing a T-shirt. It's this new translation of a book that I wrote called Hypo Subjects. Came out in Korean. The cover was so cool that me and my co-author got this T-shirt made. The topic of the book is a little bit like, how do you live in the contemporary times when you realize that you are stuck in a very claustrophobic situation? You know, I think maybe just to translate my book, Hyper Objects, really simply, I would like to say that the basic feeling of being caught in something so huge that you can't really see it all at once is a sense of claustrophobia. Yeah, if you were going to reduce the word hell to one word, you know, if you were going to say that living in a global warming time, you know, but also living in a time of the rise again, and very painful to talk about, fascism around the world, in part as a reaction to that. You could say that in a way it's like you're living in hell, but what is hell fundamentally is claustrophobia. Yeah, the inability to move, the feeling of being stuck in prison. Yeah, The good news, of course, is that you know that you are, right? Step one of setting yourself free from prison is to realize that you are in prison. And I'm talking to you obviously from the USA. And we're about to have an election, obviously, and it's very, very frightening for everybody. I'm sure it's frightening for everyone around the world what could happen here. I want to reassure people actually a little bit, because you may be getting news from wherever you're getting the news from, actually. You're not going to be feeling something. You see, the news is always some kind of narration about the past, right? And it's always filtered through somebody's filter. And at the moment, there's a lot of misinformation and there's also a lot of disinformation. But furthermore, the basic sort of feeling isn't translated very well in the news. You know, whether or not Rupert Murdoch is in control of distributing it, right? Whether or not there's this terrible propaganda coming from Elon Musk. It's hard for my friends in, say, for example, in Britain, to know that there is actually in this country, there's a very good feeling. It doesn't translate so well on the TV or on the radio or in the newspapers for all kinds of reasons. And it's a little bit the topic of my talk, right? Because it's like part of the claustrophobia, which is the phenomenology of hell, is this sense that we're imprisoned in the past, right? The future can't happen. Different things can't happen. Change can't happen. Yeah. And, you know, I would like to sort of suggest that, you know, far from being kind of spiritual beings trapped in a terrible world of matter, which is the Gnosticism picture of the world, it's almost the opposite. We are very beautiful, fragile, physical beings, right? Including our brains, right? Including how we think, yeah? Trapped in a universe of terrible, terrible ideas, you know. And Lukáš was talking about, you know, hell is other people for Sartre. Well, for me, hell is the concepts and the ideas that we're caught in. And these ideas are not just sort of sentences or words or phrases. They're actually also embodied in social space and political practices and the way we treat each other. Yeah. The worst one for me is the master versus slave binary, which is kind of this filter through or sorting algorithm, you might say, that has been sorting the world into master and slave, subject and object, male and female, active and passive, masculine, feminine, right? Straight and queer, right? Like it's the way that the world has been sorted forever, it seems, for many thousands of years, is this master-slave binary. The good news, I think, is that it's about to dissolve. It's about to dissolve socially. It's dissolving in thought. It's dissolving in art and culture. Some people really don't like that, and they're holding on for dear life to this legacy, right? The way it works in the USA is that there's obviously a very palpable, very physical legacy of slavery. And this legacy is still happening, right? The past is something that's still happening. That's a good definition of the past, actually, is funnily enough, it's not a little dot on a line. It's like stuff that is still happening to you. You know, when you read a poem, it's still happening to you, right? It was written a few hundred years ago, but it's happening to you now. The past is something that's still happening to you. It's still kind of haunting you, like a bad dream. You know, Karl Marx talks about the past as a sort of nightmare, which is sort of weighing on you. The feeling of claustrophobia, of being stuck in a nightmare. Yeah. The good news again is that you know that you're stuck in a nightmare, right? You know that you're caught in some kind of nasty, creepy version of the truth that's kind of distorted and weird and old, like being in a really old, funky record store filled with wrong record labels about everything, right? There's gender, there's race, there's history, there's politics, and everything's a bit wrong. You know, the record stores had all these different managers in it, but still, where is this feeling of creepy, right? Why? How can you even know that you're in hell? You see, and I think this is the redeeming quality of time, right? Because we're made out of time. The funny thing is that our sentience, right, is very it's made out of time, yeah. And what we call religion is actually very much to do with the most basic kinds of sentience, right? The most basic kinds of awareness of kind of inside versus outside, right? Like the nasty kind of vomit, kind of level of being sentient, yeah. Which means that if trees are sentient, right? If plants are sentient, it's very likely that plants are also sentient. Then plants have something like religion, because religion is talking to the very fundamental fact of being a life form, which is the metabolism. Yeah, it's this relationship between the what is inside and what is outside, what is included and what is excluded. Yeah. And quite commonly, of course, religion is about exclusion. You know, we want to get rid of the bad stuff. Yeah. And there is this notion of the scapegoat, which has to do with, you know, packing all the bad stuff into this scapegoat, right, and then excluding them from the community. So I know about this a lot because I accidentally become the scapegoat in a lot of situations, and also I volunteer to become the scapegoat quite a lot, and I deliberately say things that are in sort of provocative in order to sort of provoke that. So I know a bit about this, right? But this is also how the fascism works in politics, right? And there's no accident why fascism deploys religion, because it's also talking to inclusion versus exclusion. The word comes from the fasces, which is Latin for a bundle, right? A bundle of sticks, or like a gang, like of little things that are they're weak on their own is the idea, but when they're in this bundle, they're very strong, right? You can break the pencil, but when you have a bundle of pencils, they're very strong. That's the fascism, yeah. The idea that as an individual human being, you don't mean anything. Your identity is from the mass group identity. And there is a kind of mass psychology of fascism, right, which has to do with feeling immersed into a bundle or gang like that is exclusive. And when I define it this way, I'm not making much of a distinction between fascism or totalitarianism, right? I'm sort of going along a little bit with Hannah Arendt and her definition of totalitarianism. And also I'm thinking about one of my new favorite writers, Wilhelm Reich. Wilhelm Reich wrote a book called Mass Psychology of Fascism, 1933, right? Pretty much like he published it in 1935 as a first edition, and he nailed it. You know, the problem is not an economic one necessarily; it's a psychic one, and the psychic one goes very deep into the psychic structure of the human being as this inclusion exclusion thing. And there is a sense in fascism, also in some religion, of like ecstatic, like immersion into a group, right, dissolving into the group, and so this is the problem, right? Like the fascist leader hijacks that feeling of ecstasy, and then it's very difficult to talk to, because it's very deep down in the psyche. And economic reasons, you know, not to be fascist don't work so well, because of this incredibly deep psychic pull, right? So I think it's very important to talk to the thing called religion, right, and start to realize that actually, you know, first of all, you can't really ignore it, right? You can't get rid of it, because the trouble is, of course, if you exclude religion from your thought, you are also being religious. This is the problem, because religion can be about excluding the evil, right, and inviting the good. And René Girard, right, the philosopher, talks about, this language of the scapegoat, which I was just mentioning. And then he basically says, quite a lot of the time people exclude religion, and they're doing it in this way that is also religion, right? So you have to address it. You can be religious even when you think you're not being, right? And this is a big problem. So we have to really address this issue. And I think also because the planet scale emergencies that confront us are so big that they are like a kind of petri dish, right? And in this petri dish, all the very sort of intense basic things about us as life forms gets magnified. Yeah. And if we're not careful, we end up with a global fascisms everywhere to kind of pretending deal with this by just excluding the other all the time, just getting rid of the demonized other all the time, and just end up with a war situation where people are making war on themselves, war on other people. And so, it sounds really corny to talk this way, but love and mercy and pity and peacefulness, as my favorite poet William Blake would say, mercy, pity, peace, and love, yeah, really do save the world, but in a very rigorous sense, right? Which is that on a mass scale, these things become how to do planet scale politics, right? So what religion is really talking to is it's talking to the individual life form and the interface between that life form and the outside, but it's also talking to planet scale, actually. Nation scale, it's when you equate religion and the nation, it turns into the fascism, right? But if everyone's doing it, if there's a planet scale political action, it's got to have a religious component to it. There's another reason why, of course, step one of realizing that you can escape from prison, right, is knowing that you're in prison, right? And the knowing that you're in prison is kind of free from prison. This is basic sort of Immanuel Kant theory of the sublime, right? Being able to think, the feeling of being able to think straight when you're in an abusive, oppressive situation is very liberating, right? Like you're stuck, but you know that you're stuck. So you can escape, right? Theoretically, right? So it's not an optional extra to have this feeling, right? You can call it Buddha nature, you can call it whatever you want, you can call it the divine, whatever you want to call it, right? But it is a transcendental dimension, yeah, that cannot be hurt by what is happening in this world, right? How Martin Luther King got to inspire everybody, even people who might have racist thoughts, right? He gave them a reason to work on it, right? Because he's stood up in front of millions of people, and he stood up in front of millions of people in the future, right? Because he went on the TV and he said, I have a dream. And I have a dream. Already, in a way, he's sort of won by saying I have a dream. Yeah, because he's suggesting there's another dimension to the world called the future. Yeah, we're caught in all these things. We're stuck in all this horrible stuff, mostly to do with concepts that are kind of imprisoning our creativity. One of these is the master-slave duality, right? But if you're confident enough to say there is a future, right, and allow people to feel this feeling, even if it's a very evanescent feeling, this sense that there is another world, yeah, the future is another world, right? You can't see it, really. You can't see the future anywhere, but you can feel it a little bit. Sometimes people call it affect. Yeah, it's a transpersonal vibe rush. It's a sort of it seems almost like nothing. I have a dream is nothing, right? You have a dream, it's nothing compared to like a tank or a bomb or a vicious sort of fascist paramilitary squad pulling your friend out into the street and beating them to a pulp. It doesn't seem like anything. But it's actually it's also more powerful than all of that, because it's from the future, you see. This dream is from the future. I have a dream that when you say it, it makes the audience think, what's the guy talking about? You start to visualize. Yeah. And visualization is a emotion. You've already kind of start to create the future, before he fills it in with the content, It's so important to give people this knowledge, right? Which also has this feeling to it of that another world is possible. And I'm here to tell you that in America right now, there is this feeling. It's been kind of clicking into place more and more and more obviously and kind of stupidly, more and more and more reliably, right? So you don't even have to worry about it. Over the last few weeks, since Kamala Harris started her campaign, it's actually sort of become incredibly part of our world, but it doesn't translate into the news. This feeling does not translate into the news media for all kinds of reasons. They don't want to know about it. They're very scared of Trump. They're making all these deals with the fascism. And because they are reporting facts that are the past facts, they can't convey this. This is what they can't do, you see. And so when you're in another country, you might hear all these terrible things that are going on, and you might get really scared. Is America going to get it right? And I truly believe America is going to get it right, okay? We're going to get it right, guys. Millions and millions and millions of people have already voted for Kamala Harris. And my opinion is that we're going to crush the other guy in the most God almighty wave of, statement about freedom. But you might not know that from listening to the news. It might seem like just completely the opposite. Yeah. So yeah, religion is talking to this incredibly basic level where, if you're sentient, you're aware of the kind of things that you bring in and things that you push out of your body, and to be alive, you have to have a kind of permeable boundary, right? You can't have a completely solid one, otherwise you end up dead. And this is the real problem with the fascism, is that in the end, it's just death. It's the Freudian phrase is the death drive, right? This maniacal pursuit of safety ends up being about everything's dead, because in a world where there's no life, I guess everything is safe, right? But life implies a kind of risk, life actually implies the future, because life implies accidents can happen. Yeah. Evolution, which is made out of random genetic mutation, and it's made out of symbiosis, which is random encounters between strangers, and it's made out of sexual display, which is completely random aesthetic, what's the right word? Beauty, yeah, for want of a better word. Random meaning with no direction, right? There's no point. Yeah, if you find peacocks beautiful, that's as much feeling as the female peacock also has, right? Which is therefore as much feeling as the male peacock also has, right? But Charles Darwin said, when I think of a peacock's tail, I feel like I want to throw up. And this feeling is a pleasure, right? It's like it's too much pleasure because he's realizing that he has the same, as much enough of the feeling as the female peacock, really. It's a totally totally universally available feeling, and it's it's why everything looks the way it does, right? It's why there are these books behind me. It's why I'm wearing this T-shirt. It's why I have this particular, setup here. There's no reason for it. It's just to do with, in a causal sense, queer female desire. But that queer female desire is actually also available to all other genders of all other life forms that sexually reproduce, right? And why is that? Because life as such is based on quantum theory. Life is because at the bottom of the universe, time isn't pointing at anything. You know, at the bottom of the universe, time is jiggling backwards and forwards, right? Jiggling, simultaneous, very hard to think about. It only kind of averages out to forwards. And life is a thing that exploits this fact of our universe. You know, even if the universe had a teeny sliver of life, even if it was only just on Earth, that would be kind of a miracle in a way. That would be evidence that the universe as such isn't a machine. Even if life was just restrained to this one particular biosphere on this planet, it would be fantastic news about the universe. But of course, we know it's very likely that there's lots of life forms on other planets, and that it would be absurd to imagine that we were the only ones. Yeah. But even if we were the only ones, it would mean that that the universe was not a mechanism. That in the end, we live in a merciful universe, right? Because life is chemicals kind of having mercy on themselves, right? Instead of one chemical eats the other one chemical dissolves the other one. Yeah, physically the black hole absorbs everything. They sort of automatically do it, right? But life is when the chemicals kind of hesitate, right? They don't do that. They can reproduce instead of being destroyed. And this means that, you know, mercy is a fundamental category of our world, right? Mercy is kind of wired in, which, like, how can you even feel mercy? How can you even hesitate, right? How can there even be this funny, uncanny feeling, right? In the end, like if you really break it down to a teeny tiny atomic structure, mercy is made out of kind of hesitation, right? You're fighting someone. I never physically hit anybody, but, you know, to imagine of sort of verbally hitting someone in the middle of the fight, you think to yourself, why am I doing this? Why am I even doing this? Why is this even happening? What the hell? You know, there's this moment of kind of uncanny hesitation, right? Heidegger would call it Vorhandenheit, right? This funny kind of, wait, what? And how can you even do that, right? How can your brain even hesitate, right? How can it do that? If the world is a mechanism, how can there be any hesitation at all? You know, I mean, since thoughts are an output of the brain, thoughts might even be an output of quantum theoretical processes in the brain anyway, right? But even if that's not true, I think, you know, we live in a world where mercy is possible, and mercy is deep, right? It's the revenge, the mechanical sort of revenge cycle is the superficial one, and the mercy is the deep one, right? Like life evolved after the rest of the universe, but that means life was logically possible in the universe. There's lots of things like that, right? Like flowers evolved after plants, but that means that flowers were logically possible as part of plants, right? It's sort of it's almost sort of obvious, but it sounds weird, but it's actually really obvious that stuff that happens chronologically after is logically implied in the structure of how things are. Yeah, it sort of makes perfect sense, really. So, you know, the big picture is that we can do this. You know, we can imagine a different world. We can imagine the possibility of another world, and furthermore, that's because we live in a universe that is deeply structured to be orientated towards the future. You can theoretically generate a quantum random number, right? This random number cannot be predicted by any algorithm, even if you run the algorithm for trillions and trillions of years longer than you think the universe will happen. This means that there can be something different that cannot be predicted, right? This means the future is radically different from the past, and people in our world right now, which is bursting into flame thanks to people like me who didn't do enough to work with the legacy of enslavement, which gave rise to everything, I think, historically speaking, can imagine a different world and can create it. It's very important for us living now to be able to hold on to this, and to know that that's actually deeply possible. Yeah. So that's where I want to land in my lecture, right? I want to sort of say what is called religion. In a way, the word religion, I've been thinking about it recently. In Latin, it means binding back, right? And what is being bound back? In a funny way, in a good way, right? We think the word religion is bad. We often say, "Oh, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious." But let's think about the word religion. Actually, so think about how it isn't bad. The mechanical churning, yeah, can be held back. You can hold it back. You can make it hesitate, right? If God or Buddha nature or whatever that is, the Tao, if those things are real, then we sense them in these uncanny moments when there is this kind of delay, hesitation between what is seemingly happening and our sense of it. The fact that our nervous systems are always a little bit time shifted from the present moment when the sensations are occurring should strike us as actually very good news. That sort of fundamentally we are time shifted. Yeah. In other words, this thing here, this basic sort of feeling of my body, like in the American rhyme, is heads, shoulders, knees and toes, right? That basic proprioception, yeah, is a couple of hundred milliseconds in the past. What does it mean? This thing here, which grew out of the biosphere, right? The biosphere, this is an expression of it, is in the future. This is the future, yeah, the physical world, the beautiful, lovely, ordinary, opaque, at some level unspeakable, opaque, beautiful, physical world is the future. Yeah, everything we think about that's good about religion is what's good about the physical world in terms of how a sentient system recognizes it, right? Furthermore, my sense of myself, as opposed to this biosphere, is like an upside down copy. Yeah. If this wasn't true, then worms would get stuck in the tunnel they're building because they couldn't tell the difference between themselves and the tunnel. So what happens is they feel the tunnel, it's a couple of hundred milliseconds shifted, then invert the signal, and that becomes like a silhouette, right? The worm's sense of being the worm is like a silhouette of the biosphere. Your sense of yourself in sitting in the chair right now is a silhouette of your awareness of the biosphere. Your sense of your body is the ecological awareness. You don't need anything more than just feeling your body, like up, down, right, left, all these. This is an ecological sensation, right? And it's a little bit time shifted, right? This sense of me is a couple of hundred milliseconds after the sense of environment, which is a couple of hundred milliseconds after the environment actual one, right? So the sort of the future is literally, it's kind of palpable, almost. It's like it's tantalizing, right? And so this kind of tantalizing feeling that somebody genius like Martin Luther King can evoke with "I have a dream" is actually very much about something incredibly concrete, right? Which is the beautiful, lovely physical world that hasn't yet been ruined by all the stupid ideas that we have about it. Yeah, all those stupid ideas can't touch ever the silence, the fundamental, unspeakable silence of the physical world, which is an immense relief, right? Hell and heaven, if they're anything, are to do with too much noise. Everything means something in heaven. That's why, in a way, heaven is also a kind of hell. The people's picture of heaven, which is like you're talking to God all the time and watering pot plants and singing choir all the time. It's like, it's also claustrophobic, right? Because everything is saturated with meaning. But this world there's more quietness. I'm a big fan of John Milton, and the Son of God in Paradise Lost creates the cosmos as a way to transcend the fighting between the devils and the angels, right? The angels went wrong because the devils showed up. So let's create something different. Let's do something different. And the first word of creation is shh. Yeah, the first creation word is the quietness, right? Of just like waiting for something. It's the initial creative act is just the sort of open-ended sentience, in a way, like this is the universe, right? Is God being quiet, and that's a lovely thing. That's why to care about taking care of each other and taking care of the biosphere. It's a beautiful, huge, big reason, you know. America, if it's anything, is a country from the future. America is an advert for planet scale politics. All this paranoia about world government and stuff America is actually a model of something different, that doesn't not have to do with the state, but has to do with planet scale. The things that America creates that are beautiful are like jeans, T-shirts. We take like broken European things like slavery, we make them into cool things that everybody likes, like funk, and hip hop and T-shirts. Yeah, that's what we do. We take the past and we make it into something cool, which is kind of from the future, a little bit. At least I'd like to think so. At least on a good day, that's what we do. On a bad day, we do terrible stuff and we just ruin it. Anyway, that's the end of my talk. Thank you for listening.
Fascinating, Timothy. Thank you. Let's have a round of applause. Yeah. Timothy, what I find really fascinating in the way how you present your account of religion is that you link it to biology and to a certain reading of metabolism and the organism, which is a reading of religion that we don't usually get. And I wonder in this sense, like, there is this emancipatory, this forgiving, empowering religion. But you also talked about America, you also talked about fascism, and that brings me to the side of religion, which is powerful in this like oppressive sense, yeah, which brings imperatives, with actually creates those hells that you talk about. So I wonder, how do you deal with these socio-political aspects of religion, accounting also like for a tendency for religious fundamentalism in some kinds of like institutionalized religious forums. I wonder, like, how do you vibe with critiques of this kind of perspective on religion?
Yeah. The feeling that we call conscience, right, is fundamentally not about I did a bad thing or I did a good thing. Fundamentally, it's part of the operating system of being sentient, right? Because there's this time-shifted quality, the consciousness itself is kind of conscience, right? Like in a very simple way, right? Like, for example, I'm having it right now, déjà vu. This funny feeling that we've already had this conversation is default, Lukáš, in a way,
Lovely.
to being sentient. The one that we think is the anomaly, the déjà vu, is it's a mistake, but actually it's the fundamental one, I think. This idea, wait a minute, did I just leave the lights on? I went out. Have I just remembering that you forgot in another way, right? Like remembering that you forgot something. Did I just, this is related to forgiveness, actually, because I think forgiveness is dependent on forgetting. In English you say forgive and forget, but I think the real mechanism is forget and forgive, right? Like, why are we having this fight? Why are we having? I don't remember why to hurt the other person. I forget, right? This is a beautiful. If we're going to help AI to be more moral, We should help AI to be more forgetful. Maybe I'm just justifying my existence as a 56-year-old absent-minded professor, right? But I feel like forgetfulness is very special. Like if elephants never forget, it's another phrase, elephants never forget, then you should run away from elephants. This is very scary. The AI doesn't forget about you. This is the trouble, right? The surveillance is about, we don't want to forget anything. But the fundamental awareness is, wait a minute. So conscience is, funnily enough, this is made out of forgetting. Like, wait, when you feel ashamed, it's like, wait a minute, I forgot to put my underpants on, right? That funny feeling is to do with this time-shifted quality. What I'm saying is, this is like a very simple biological version of a phenomenological philosophy. Yeah, a lot of phenomenological thought has been confirmed in neuroscience. Like, for example, here's another example. It's related. When you're intending to do something, you've already started to do it. By about a couple of hundred milliseconds, like I'm intending to put my finger up, I'm already putting my finger up. Wow, like this is in the future. The brain that is doing that is in the future. Me intending it is the past. That's my idea of. I'm adding a certain picture of myself doing it, right? And this should strike us as incredible, actually, because it's what is said in Heidegger, right? You are always already in the world is literally saying the same thing, right? And so there's a kind of way in which conscience doesn't mean, and this is back to Heidegger again in a nice way, it doesn't mean I did a bad thing. Now, this is going to sound terrible, but it isn't. It's the notion of original sin. It's like I am the evil. I am the mistake. I am the malfunction that I'm seeing in the world is me. That's why I'm seeing it, because I am it, because sentience is a malfunction. It's always a little bit late, to the party. And then my sense of my sentience is late, even later to the party, right? And so you're not guilty because you did bad stuff. You are aware that you did bad stuff because you are formally guilty. Now that should mean that when you say that to yourself, it should be very gentle. When you say, I am a sinner, in Christianity, for example, this should be the nicest thing, in a way, that you say to yourself. You should say that to yourself in the gentlest, nicest possible way. Because why? Because what we're talking about here is default to being a life form, right? But I think sentience goes all the way down in life forms. At least let's just say, it's default to being sentient. Forgive me for going on, Tomas, Lukáš, but I think that what you're saying here is very important, the way you frame the question.
Well, I mean, I'm thinking about this also in relation to what you just said about forgiving and forgetting. One of my favorite theologians, her name is Marika Rose. She writes about Christianity's capacity to forgive as something that is actually essential for the ability to live with oneself and to live in a community. And I wonder, in this sense, you seem to also think about forgiveness as kind of like a capacity that we forgot about, also like in the environmental sense. And I'm especially curious whether there is any takeaway, perhaps also for environmental movements, in how to mobilize forgiveness as the part of their tactics or part of their public presentation, I would say.
Wow, Lukáš. I just forgot that you were called Lukáš, for example. Stupid. This is a big thing because environmentalism, please forgive me, I say this is me saying a bad thing, and I feel like I get paid to say bad things about stuff. We talk the language of revenge, mostly. We don't talk the language of forgiveness. We talk the language of, for example, there's my friend Adam McKay, right? And he created this thing called Hyperobject Industries, Hollywood production company, to make movies about these hyperobjects. And he made this film called Don't Look Up. I don't know if you've seen this movie, but it's about a comet and it's coming to destroy the Earth. And the lamestream media isn't covering it. Leonardo DiCaprio is very upset. Jennifer Lawrence is very upset. And the implication of the film is a kind of warning, like, you're going to be sorry when the global warming catches up to you and you get burned by it's this revenge, you see. Now, the stupidest version of Jesus loves me anyway is oh dear, this is so rude for academic. It's better than anything that film or anything I can say trained in academia actually to talk about this, or environmentalism is talking this Old Testament language of revenge, right? Until we start talking to the notion of forgiveness. I'm not saying about we should forgive oil corporations, which I'm not saying we should, please carry on doing bad
Let's not
stuff.
do that, yeah.
See, yeah, a couple of years ago, I learned how to forgive. I'm a survivor of terrible abuse. I come from a family which was connected to a major London crime syndicate, and I can't even believe I'm saying this stuff now because I'm old enough to say it, but I couldn't even believe it, even just a few years ago. And I forgave my dad, and I didn't even realize I'd done it because I'd never felt it before. But I had this funny dream, and I woke up, and there was all this kind of psychic space inside of me. And in this space, there was hate, love, confusion, admiration, indifference, contempt, all the different feelings, right? But they all had a lot of space. And I was like, oh, that the wisdom of language, like forgive, it suggests literally you're creating this space, you're forgiving, so that all these different feelings can happen, right? So forgiveness doesn't mean it's okay what you did. It means it's terrible what you did, right? But I'm talking about it in another context that can allow for the future. And so this is the trouble. The tools, including the conceptual tools that we bring to the party as environmentalists, might be the wrong tools. Yeah, and actually, there's a lot more in the place that we call religion than we might sometimes like to think.
To wrap up this conversation and also give space to the audience, you brought up your age several times, and I feel like there's a certain way in which your philosophy is always very personal, and it's something that I really appreciate about the way how you, I would say, like revive the idea of philosophy as a personal practice, as a self-reflexive practice, as a practice that is also confessional in a certain way. And there's a long
Yeah,
tradition of philosophical thinking. I mean, like Confessions of Marcus Aurelius, yeah, or like Simone Weil and her way, how she talks about, I mean, philosophy as observation. I wonder, like, how do you position yourself in this tradition of philosophy as, care for self and by extension also care for others?
yeah. Thank you, Luca. Thank you so much. That since since this physical thing is the future, right? Since my sense of it is like always a little bit uncannily shifted, right? All I've really got to be going on is what could be called myself, but even that's like a not such a great label. And I think one of the fascinating things about Socrates is that he wasn't trying to be right. Yeah, like he wasn't actually being like that 70s detective Columbo, who asks you more and more questions until you admit that you did the murder. He's actually literally just standing next to you saying, "Hey, what are you doing?" And he's kind of copying like a clown, miming, copying, right? Mimesis, which actually literally is a physical miming mimesis. It's to do with physical movement, right? And coming to the conclusion that you can't ever know what you're doing in some powerfully unitary metaphysical sense, right? And so in a very deep way, all you've really got is your quote unquote yourself. Sometimes instead of saying mind or self, sometimes now I like to say soul. It actually seems more precise than mind, which makes me think of something as opposed to my body, or self, which makes me think of something as opposed to other. Soul is actually more like it, and is this a physical thing or a spiritual thing? I can't tell, right? It's got a feeling to it. And so I sort of think, especially as you begin to realize that philosophy isn't about having ideas, the word idea is not in the word philosophy. There's the word wisdom and there's the word love, right? And in a funny way, if you love wisdom, it's quite obvious that you shouldn't have too many ideas, right? Like, in a way, ideas are the enemy. The wisdom is how to not have ideas, you know? But of course, you could hear that, meaning you should just turn off your brain and do whatever you want, which is an idea. You see, aggression, just acting out, is an idea. Somebody gives you permission to just act out on all the prejudices in your head. That's an idea. And the trouble with the fascism is it's just based on like stupid ideas, from thousands of years ago. All you have to do to be a fascist is just to hit the retweet. This is the modern version of I was just following orders. I was just retweeting a meme. I wasn't, can't you take a joke? I was just, that horrible sort of automation. So thank you for asking that, because I think, confessing in a way, testifying, you could say, in a more positive sounding way is that's what you've got. That's what you got to give to people.
Amazing. Timothy, I'm going to give space to the audience now to ask you also questions. So I'm going to look for any raised hands. And in case there are questions, make also sure that you speak to the mic so that Timothy can hear you.
Of course, what I've just said means that the more stupid you feel like the question sounds in your ears really dumb, the better it's going to be. Very much. Like, this is not just some Jedi mind trick to get you to say stuff. It's
encouragement.
The obvious stuff. It's the stuff, So the more, if it sounds really dumb, like, how could I even be asking this? That's the right one.
Looks like we will give a couple of more moments. Oh, there's one question over there.
Greetings over the channel that unites us. And I do have a stupid question. Have you ever recently had a dream to go drink beer with Trump or Putin? If
Wow.
your answer would be yes, tell us what you would ask them or talk about with them.
I have not. I've not had this dream. You see, this is formally speaking, these people are human beings and they should be treated like human beings, right? The trouble is, in my experience, and it is a very personal experience, of my childhood and of other things in my life, it's very, very personal. Dealing with someone who has a major personality disorder, let's just say they're a psychopath, or they have some kind of narcissistic disorder, and let's say they have created or are part of a politics that enables this, that is basically that, but like scaled up to thousands of millions of people. My idea of being nice to them is always going to be a Band-Aid on a gigantic, festering, bleeding wound. What to do is to stop them. You got to stop them first of all. You actually just have to get any political progress done, or to get any like decent relating done. You got to stop the fascism, right? Like, a lot of people now, this also is about the followers, right? The leader is really just another idiot that the followers have put up onto the stage, who's kind of stage diving into the crowd, right? The point is the fans, the fan base, right? The thousands and millions of people who are doing that, right? And they have become formally, as Hannah Arendt would say, kind of evacuated. They don't have feelings, and they don't need to have feelings anymore, right? That doesn't mean you should be sadistic to them, but it means that they have no inner space, right? Which is although they've been trained to sort of feel like they don't. It's a condition that one psychoanalyst calls normosis. It's the opposite of psychotic. Psychotic, you've escaped from reality. Normotic, you have escaped from your inner space, right? And in normotic families, there is a lot of suicide because, of course, you can't do it. You can't. But this emphasis on extreme normality, right? And basically, like, let's just go with all the stupid default ideas like male and female and master and slave of who we are, is to do with this kind of socialized version of this condition, right? So if I had a dream like that, I would be suspicious of myself as to what the hell what I was. And every time I have had a wishful thinking that I could fix somebody or help them or stuff, I've been heartbroken, deeply heartbroken. It just happened to me last week about somebody I won't go into, but I got the idea, oh, this is finally a way for me to, intervene in this. And I got my heart broken again. And this is what happens, you see, over and over. And if you watch this film, The Apprentice, it's great, because Roy Cohen is a very psychopathic, very intense lawyer guy, but even he can't deal with Trump. Even he gets reduced to tears by the end when he sees the absolute void inside of the other guy. It's difficult because on that level, that guy is like alien. Ripley has got the right idea, right? Like, you can't fight alien, you can't run away from alien, you can't hide from alien, you can't negotiate with alien. There's only one thing to do: you have to blow him out the airlock. You know. And she figures it out really quickly, which is why she's one of my personal favorites. So Kamala Harris also loves Ripley. Or the girl in the horror movie. I'm watching all the Nightmare on Elm Street, and eventually the girl figures out, I got to fight this guy. I got to get rid of the guy. And so this is the dilemma, right? And I think in the voting booth, a lot of people will have pity. They'll be like, how can I do this to this poor old man? How can I do that? How can I expose this poor old man to the rest of his life in jail? How can I do that? Right? In the voting booth, you have to have no pity, no mercy. Why? Because you're having no mercy on ideas, right? To have mercy on the person, you have to crush the idea, which is now about to take over social space. Yeah. So ideas, you should never have any mercy for ideas. You always have mercy for the people, right? But you're not voting for a person, you're voting for an idea. You're hitting Republican or Democrat, right? You're voting for Project 2025, which will destroy what we know of America, or not, and that's the thing, and even more primitively and paradoxically, if suicide versus murder. This is my therapist talking. I was in psychoanalysis for 24 years, but if it comes down to it, this naughty Professor Morton's thing, you should always do the murder. Is always better than the suicide. Kill the other guy.
We still have roughly 10 minutes for questions, but since it seems there are no questions in the audience at the moment, I would like to ask you one question, which is kind of, I would say, related to end or ending. And that's that religion often comes with some vision of the end of things, yeah, the apocalypse, the eschatology. And today when we talk about climate change, I mean, of course, the end, in a certain sense, the end of the world in the singular or plural is kind of the elephant in the room. But I mean, looking at the long history of communities that already lost their land, let's say due to settler colonialism or genocides, I wonder how to think the ends of the world without assuming that the real end of the world only happens when the Western, white, colonial hegemony crumbles. Yeah. So is it even possible to talk about the end of the world when we literally watch the end of the world in plural unfolding across the globe in real time? Let's say Palestine, Ukraine, Sudan.
Yeah, the notion of the end of the world might be even getting in the way of what is really coming to terms with what is really happening. You know, and as you say, quite a lot of speech about the end of the world is really just the end of the white guy world, which is the idea of the white guy is in charge of everything. Because now even the white guy gets, you know, hurt by Exxon and so on, by the decisions that they made. But what you also say that's very interesting is the after the end of the world, right? After you realize the bad thing already happened, what is there left, right? Is the grief. The end of the world isn't the end of the world, you know. The real end of the world will be the end, the possibility that you couldn't grieve for anything, that you had to just keep on hurting the other in order to exist. You know, grief is a very wonderful thing because grief is an emotion, or isn't even an emotion, that can contain all the other ones and is always bigger than my idea of myself. And what is required, quite obviously in America, is something like in South Africa, right? There needs to be about 100 years of truth and reconciliation with about one Desmond Tutu, you know, for every million people or something like that. That'll probably do it. 100 years, you know, because everyone's got PTSD, everyone, right? So black people, white people, everyone's got PTSD from hundreds and hundreds of years of enslavement happening before their very eyes, you know. And that requires not constantly thinking that the final truth will appear. The problem with the end of the world is the idea of the end of the illusion, the end of the uncertainty, right? The end of language. Like finally everything will have meaning. We'll know who is the baddie, who is the goodie. But of course, if it's that kind of end of the world, it's called a nightmare. You know, in the name of this end of the world, which is heaven, people are willing to create the hell, right? They're willing to kill people. They're willing to get into paramilitary groups and start, you know, doing the stuff. I'm imagining around the election, whoever wins, people will start trying to act out what the guy's been promising to do anyway. You know, and you know, one of the promises, we're going to have military in the cities. There's going to be checkpoints everywhere, and then, but also there will be paramilitaries trying to do the same thing and like just drag people who we don't like the look of into the street and like beat them to a pulp. You know, in the name of this is the now we have the mask is off, right? So I think there's a lot to be said for the mask, you know, and what is it? It's the physical world. The fundamental thing about a mask is it's hiding the meaning. Yeah, it's opaque, you know. And if there's anything about the physicality of the world, it's about evolution. It doesn't mean anything. It is silent, you know, in that sense, fundamentally, radically silent, you know. And grief is the feeling of coming to terms with this silence, right? With what has already been done that can't be undone. Panic is knowing that that's about to happen, but like you're in the waiting room of grief, right? Panic is the everything emotion, but in terms of you don't want to feel it, right? So that you're panicking because you know that you're going to be in the grief space, right? The word woke is a panic word, right? It's a word from the world of panic. It's like, you know what happens next, which is that some white guys are going to start crying about what they did or what their parents did or what their parents, right? It's in the mockery. It's in the feeling of mockery in that word is this knowledge that the truth already got out, right? But here's the good news: the possibility of whatever that is, to follow the truth, even if the truth doesn't line up with what you think it should be, right? Even if it hurts, right? The possibility of a sentient being to come to a conclusion that was very different from what they thought it could be, right? The very possibility of a logical structure within the chaos at all right, is incredibly good news, right? That right, as opposed to now we will know what we already knew, which was that the baddie was here and the goodie was there, and that's not what I'm talking about. It's this other idea of open, you know, logic, not as a pre-established program, but as the possibility for things to kind of hang together, right? Which requires the kind of the minimal peaceful spaciousness to occur, right? Is always a possibility. And so I think, you know, the end of the world, if we're going to be thinking about it in a good way, is like the end of a certain way of coping with the fundamental mysteriousness, the silence. Mystery means to close the lips in Greek. Mystery is a onomatopoeia for you know. And in a funny way, the universe is God going So you can't see God anyway because God's going things that make you go you know. And coming to terms with that, coming to terms with a fundamental opacity that is sort of everywhere, right? Like even in the structure of truth, there has to be this opacity, right? That Gödel's incompleteness theorem. There have to be things that are true that can't be proved. They just have to be. In order for logical systems to happen, there has to be this opaque. You know, we're not talking here about physical opaque. We're not talking about post-structuralist squiggles as opposed to meaning. We're talking about within truth itself, there is this silence, but the silence is the redeeming feature, right? It's a feature, not a bug. And like how to get used to that? You know, the noise it makes is the grief. You know, somebody dies for no reason, and you shut down. You know, you can't cope with it until and then you can. Yeah, but it's not on your time.
There is a space for one last question. You can also ask in Czech, and the translator can do the work of switching to English for Timothy. So do not worry about that. But if there is no question, since it's almost the time that when we will have to say goodbye, there is just like one small question that I have for you, Timothy, which is you have a T-shirt which says hypo subjects. And of course, that relates to hyper-objects as well. And I just wonder, like, from the vantage point of your current approach, how do you see some past theoretical concepts that you helped to establish, let's say, dark ecology or the hyper-objects? Like, is this a rupture or a continuity with the research that you're embarking on now?
It's a continuity. It's just getting a little bit more explicit. You know, in a funny way, I've always been talking adjacent to or inside of the thing called religion. Like a lot of my ideas are very influenced, for example, by about 40 years of seriously studying Buddhism. And if you've ever studied Buddhism quite a lot, you'll understand quite some of the ideas are very related to some of this stuff, right? This idea of hyposubject, right, is the idea that a deep feature of our world is something I'm calling it subscendence. Actually, it's better than transcendence. I should say subscendence. That actually the truth subscends the logical system that it's in, right? The silence of the world sinks out of, underneath of, you know, the cage of the meaning. It's something is always leaking out of that, and the way to cope with the hyper object world is to be the hypo subject, right? Is to like Danny in The Shining. You know, his dad is trying to murder him. He's got the axe and he's chasing him through the maze, and Danny gets really small and he sneaks out underneath the hedge. You know, this is how the little mammals survived the dinosaur its extinction, right? But the asteroid hit, little scurrying animals could survive, right? And so everything about religion is actually how to live in a much larger world where we are confronted with millions of us and millions of other life forms. How to take care of them is to get very small, you know. And as a general rule of thumb, you like the more success you have, the smaller you should get. Emotionally, become smaller. Otherwise, Otherwise, it's Donald Trump. You should get bigger and bigger and bigger. You know, but that's fundamentally uncool. You know, cool is allowing yourself to be small and a little bit failure. You know, and so that's the idea of the subsendence. And funnily enough, I found out once I'd figured this all out through set theory, you know, that the whole subsends the parts because there's always more parts than whole. I learned that in medieval Christianity, Catholic theology, Christ subsends the divinity, so sort of slips out from underneath, and that's why they're the Son of God, unquote, right? Not because they're above, but because they're underneath. And I think that's a very beautiful idea. Yeah.
Let's wrap it up there, Timothy. Thank you so much. It was a wonderful, wonderful time spending with you in the conversation, an immense pleasure. Also, thank you, audience, for careful listening, for your questions. And yeah, I wish you good luck. Wish you also everyone nice evening, and hello to Prague. Enjoy the rest of the evening. And Timothy, have a good time. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Lukáš. Bye.